The rain in Salem always seemed to whisper secrets, a constant, low murmur against the window panes. On this particular afternoon, it felt like a prelude, a hushed drum roll for a drama that had been unfolding in slow motion for months, now nearing its crescendo. My name is Jalene Croft, and at 32, I've learned that the world rarely offers new villains, only familiar ones in different disguises. I've seen this play before, felt the sharp sting of its betrayal, and walked through the desolate aftermath. That experience, a crucible of my own making, had forged in me a certain set of tools, a perceptiveness that peeled back layers, a jadedness that inoculated me against false promises, and a steadfast resolve that once set was immovable. My world, once a vibrant tapestry woven with close friendships, had begun to unravel months ago. It started with Alex, my ex-best friend, a good-hearted but naive soul, falling head over heels for Veronica. Veronica. Even her name tasted sour on my tongue now, a metallic tang of deceit. She was the fifth member of our tight-knit group, brought in by Alex, and from the moment her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around his arm, I felt a familiar chill. It was the chill of recognizing a predator, even before they bared their teeth. My gut, a loyal sentinel honed by past mistakes, screamed a silent warning. Our circle had consisted of 5. Alex and me, practically inseparable since high school. Sarah, the practical, grounding force of our group, who always saw things clearly. And then Veronica, the newcomer, along with Chloe, a sycophantic shadow who clung to Veronica's every word. Chloe was the deriding girl, as the online vernacular so accurately put it, eager to parrot Veronica's opinions and laugh at her unfunny jokes. I'd watched Veronica work her magic, or rather, her poison. It was subtle at first, a casual dependency. She needed a ride somewhere, and my car was always conveniently available. She was a little short on rent, and my wallet, always open for a friend, became her personal ATM. I remembered the countless times she'd forgotten her purse, or her phone was dead, just as the bill arrived. My generosity, a trait I'd once prided myself on, became a weakness she exploited with surgical precision. I'd found myself driving her to appointments she claimed were urgent, only for her to spend hours aimlessly wandering a mall. My bank account, once a healthy cushion, began to feel the strain, not from my own spending, but from these constant, seemingly small drains. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the principle, the gnawing realization that I was being used. Every "can you just," or "would you mind," was a tiny thread pulling at the fabric of my trust. The deeper problem, the truly insidious one, was how she treated Alex. I saw the signs, clear as day. The way she'd subtly belittle his ambitions, casting doubt on his choices, slowly eroding his self-confidence. She'd isolate him, convincing him that his long-standing friendships, our friendships, were somehow detrimental or unsupportive. There was one incident that still burned in my memory like a brand. Alex had been offered a promotion at his job, a good step up, but it required a few extra hours, a slight shift in his schedule. He was thrilled, eager to discuss it with her. Veronica's reaction wasn't celebratory. It was a cold, calculated dismissal. "Oh, more hours, so you'll just see me less then? Typical." She'd pout, retreat into a manufactured silence, turning his achievement into a source of guilt. I watched him deflate, the joy draining from his face. I pulled Alex aside, my voice low, my words carefully chosen. "Alex," I'd begun, "I'm worried about you, about Veronica. Some of the things she does, the way she talks to you, it's not right. It's manipulative." I laid out my concerns, citing specific examples. The emotional blackmail, the financial drain, the subtle ways she chipped away at his spirit. I told him how she was using my car and my money, too. I expected surprise, perhaps anger. What I got was a blank stare, then a defensive shift. "You don't understand, Jalene. She's just sensitive. She's been through a lot." And then came the ultimatum, the classic move of a master manipulator cornered. Veronica must have sensed his wavering, the seeds of doubt I'd planted. She gave him a choice, her or his friends, specifically her or me. "Jalene's trying to turn you against me, Alex," she'd wailed, her voice thick with crocodile tears. "She's jealous of our love." He chose her. He chose the illusion of love over the hard truth of friendship. The words, delivered with a strained apology, still echoed in my memory. I can't lose her, Jalene. I just can't. I need you to understand." I didn't understand. Not then, not truly. But I felt the familiar, crushing weight of betrayal, a replay of a past heartbreak I'd thought I'd long since outrun. It was a story I knew intimately, one that felt ripped from the pages of a cautionary tale, much like the ones I now sought out, compelled by the desire to understand such patterns. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily, so I stepped back. Sarah, bless her steadfast heart, remained by my side, but the circle was broken. Alex vanished into Veronica's orbit, swallowed whole by her demands. I watched from a distance, through Sarah's updates, as Veronica's grip tightened. 5 months had passed since that choice, 5 months of Alex struggling to stay afloat while Veronica clung to him like a barnacle. She was jobless, had been since she moved in with him, claiming mysterious ailments that prevented her from even looking at a job board. Her daily routine, as relayed by Alex in increasingly desperate calls to Sarah, consisted solely of laying in bed, scrolling on her phone, unless Alex physically dragged her out for some mundane errand. She had flunked out of her first year of college, a disastrous academic performance that sealed her fate with her mother. Her one requirement for Veronica to live at home had been that she stay enrolled. Now, as the Salem rain intensified, so did the tension in Alex's life. The calls to Sarah grew more frequent, more frantic. Alex was drowning. He was working double shifts, picking up every scrap of overtime he could find, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. He tried to talk to Veronica, to explain their precarious financial situation, to plead with her to find work, any work. Sarah relayed the conversation verbatim, her voice laced with outrage. "I'm too lazy to get a job," Veronica had said, her tone flat, unbothered, as if discussing the weather. Too lazy. The audacity of it, the sheer, unbridled entitlement. It was an insult to anyone who had ever truly struggled, to anyone who had ever worked hard to earn a living. I closed my eyes, the image of Alex's haggard face flashing in my mind. He was a good man, truly. Flawed, yes, susceptible to manipulation, but fundamentally decent. And he was being consumed, systematically, by someone who saw him not as a partner, but as a resource to be depleted. I understood his plight on a visceral level because I had been there. I had been the resource, the wellspring of emotional and financial support for someone who gave nothing in return. My own past, a messy entanglement with a charismatic charlatan who had bled me dry emotionally and financially, had left me scarred, but also, paradoxically, strengthened. It had taught me to recognize the patterns, the insidious dance of exploitation. It had made me jaded, yes, but also incredibly perceptive. And now I watched this familiar drama unfold, no longer a participant but a disillusioned witness. A question had been nagging at me for weeks. How long would it take for Alex to finally break, to snap out of this trance? The answer, it seemed, was almost here. Sarah told me he was finally sick of it, truly sick. He was talking about escaping, about getting his life back. He mentioned wanting to apologize to me, wanting to mend the bridges he'd burned. A faint tremor of hope, of something akin to vindication, stirred within me. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about seeing the truth prevail, about the natural consequences of someone's actions finally catching up to them. It was a long overdue reckoning, and I was ready to watch. The stage was set, the final act approaching. Alex on the verge of escape. Veronica teetering on the brink of total. And me, Jeline Croft, the quiet catalyst, watching the manipulator's self-destruction unfold like a morbid, yet deeply satisfying, cinematic masterpiece. I wondered with a quiet certainty what her last-ditch effort would be, and if it would be enough to save her from the inevitable. The rain continued its steady rhythm, washing away the remnants of a friendship and preparing the ground for something new. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing crawl towards a climax I both anticipated and dreaded. Sarah was my lifeline, our calls becoming longer, more detailed, as Alex's life with Veronica spiraled. He was barely sleeping, burdened by the weight of their shared expenses, all of which now fell squarely on his shoulders. His voice, once vibrant and full of an easygoing charm, had developed a permanent raspy edge from stress. He'd lost weight, his clothes hanging looser on his frame, and the dark circles under his eyes seemed to deepen with each passing night. He was, to put it plainly, a ghost of his former self. "She just lays there, Jeline," Sarah recounted one evening, her own voice tight with frustration. "He told me he bought groceries, came home, and found her watching reality TV, the bags still on the counter. He cooked dinner, cleaned up, and she just watched him. Said she was too tired to help." I could practically visualize the scene. Veronica, propped up against a mountain of pillows, eyes glued to the screen, a remote control clutched in her hand, while Alex, defeated, performed the endless tasks of domesticity. It was a mirror of my own past, the slow suffocation by another's willful idleness. I knew the insidious nature of that kind of drain, how it didn't just exhaust you physically, but chipped away at your soul. Alex's desperation became palpable. He started taking on side gigs, delivering pizzas after his regular job, selling some of his old collectibles online. He even considered asking his parents for money, something he swore he'd never do. The shame of his situation, the utter humiliation of being exploited so openly, was eating him alive. He tried, once more, to reason with Veronica. Sarah overheard part of the conversation on speakerphone, relaying it to me with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Alex had calmly laid out their financial straits, the dwindling savings, the accumulating bills. He even offered to help her with job applications, suggested online courses she could take to bolster her resume. Veronica's response was chilling in its apathy. "Why would I bother?" she'd scoffed. "You're doing perfectly fine, aren't you?" The casual cruelty, the complete lack of empathy, sent a fresh wave of outrage through me. It wasn't just laziness. It was a deliberate choice to be a parasite, to exist solely to consume. It proved her entitlement wasn't just a flaw, it was a core operating system. I knew this playbook. I'd lived it. The gradual erosion of a partner's self-worth, the financial dependency morphing into emotional bondage, the subtle threats and guilt trips designed to keep the victim tethered. My own manipulator had perfected these tactics, had left me so depleted that I barely recognized myself in the mirror. But unlike Alex, I hadn't had a Sarah, a steady voice of reason on the outside, a conduit to someone who knew. This was where my role as the quiet catalyst came in. I didn't interfere directly, but I guided Sarah. I advised her on what to say, what not to say. "Just listen, Sarah," I'd instructed. "Don't judge him, don't tell him I told you so. Just be a consistent, unwavering presence. Let him come to his own conclusions. Plant the idea that there's a way out, that he deserves better." Sarah, God bless her, was a natural. She'd invite Alex over for dinner, make sure he ate a proper meal. She'd offer her couch if he needed a night away. She'd listen patiently as he vented, her responses always validating his feelings, never pushing him towards a decision, but always subtly reinforcing the idea that his current situation was unsustainable and unfair. "It sounds like you're carrying a really heavy burden, Alex," she'd say softly. "No one deserves to feel that alone in a relationship." Simple words, but potent. They were the gentle nudges that helped him see the path he needed to take. Every day, I watched the slow-motion car crash, a testament to the fact that some people truly write their own downfall, and for those who had been hurt, there was a strange, quiet satisfaction in witnessing it. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The situation escalated when Alex discovered Veronica had racked up a significant amount of credit card debt, not on shared household expenses, but on frivolous online shopping, clothes she barely wore, expensive skincare products, takeout from fancy restaurants. This, for Alex, was the true rock bottom. He confronted her, his voice reportedly shaking with a mixture of anger and despair. Veronica, caught red-handed, resorted to her ultimate weapon, emotional blackmail. "Fighting the urge every day to end my own life, Alex," she whispered, her voice supposedly trembling, tears streaming down her face. "If you leave me, I don't know what I'll do. You're all I have." It was a classic manipulative ploy, one I had fallen for countless times in my past relationship. The threat of self-harm, weaponized to induce guilt and ensure compliance. It was a vile, despicable tactic designed to chain someone to you through fear and misplaced responsibility. My stomach churned as Sarah relayed this. It was a punch to the gut, a vivid recall of similar words aimed at me, words that had crippled me with anxiety and kept me trapped for far too long. But Alex finally wasn't falling for it. "He just looked at her, Jolene," Sarah recounted, her voice hushed. "He said, 'Veronica, you can't put that on me. I can't be responsible for your happiness or for your life. That's not fair.'" A flicker of triumph ignited in my chest. He was seeing it, finally. The veil was lifting. The jaded part of me, the part that had endured so much, recognized this as the true turning point. This was the moment the puppet strings snapped. This was the quiet before the storm, the moment he finally realized he had to save himself. Sarah met with Alex the next day, away from Veronica, at a neutral coffee shop. The conversation was strained, punctuated by Alex's heavy sighs and Sarah's patient affirmations. He admitted everything. The financial ruin, the emotional abuse, the constant fatigue. He talked about how he missed his old life, his old friends. He talked about me. "I know I messed up, Sarah," he'd confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Choosing her over Jolene, it was the biggest mistake of my life. Jolene was right about everything." This was the payoff, the slow burn of truth reaching its inevitable destination. My steadfastness, my refusal to engage with the drama but instead simply to be right, had paid off. I hadn't needed to shout, to argue, to convince. I had simply needed to wait, to offer a quiet alternative, and let Veronica's own destructive nature do the work. The vicarious justice I craved was not about orchestrating her downfall, but witnessing her inevitable collapse, hastened by the very traits she leveraged against others. Alex told Sarah he was going to apologize to me, properly, and he was going to leave Veronica. He had a plan. He would pack his essential belongings while she was out, then tell her it was over. He was going to move in with Sarah temporarily, just until he could get back on his feet. The news filled me with a quiet, profound sense of satisfaction. Not gloating, not vindication in a cruel sense, but a deep, resonant feeling of justice being served, not by my hand, but by the universe itself. The rain outside my window had finally tapered off, leaving behind a world washed clean, ready for a new beginning. The morning Alex was set to leave Veronica, the air in Salem felt charged, almost electric. I woke early, the pre-dawn darkness still clinging to the corners of my bedroom, and felt a nervous energy thrumming through me. This was it, the climax, the culmination of months of quiet observation and vicarious anxiety. Alex had arranged for Sarah to pick him up with her truck while Veronica was at a supposed yoga class. Her latest excuse for leaving the apartment for a few hours without having to actually do anything. My perceptiveness, honed over years, told me this was a flimsy cover, likely an hour spent at a coffee shop scrolling on her phone, but it provided the window Alex needed. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "He's packed, Jolene. Minimal stuff. Just a couple of bags," said he's ready. He looks determined. My breath hitched. Determined. That was the word I'd been waiting for. It signaled a shift from passive despair to active self-preservation. This was the rise from rock bottom, fueled not by fury, but by exhaustion and the desperate need for peace. I imagined the scene. Alex, moving quietly through the apartment that had become his cage, stuffing clothes into duffel bags, his movements precise, purposeful. The small, significant acts of reclaiming his life. He was shedding the skin of victimhood, and though the process was undoubtedly painful, it was also liberating. His resolve, I knew, was strengthened by Sarah's unwavering support, the concrete offer of a safe haven, and perhaps by the looming apology to me. That knowledge that he wanted to make amends was a quiet balm to the old wound. By mid-morning, Sarah called again. "It's done," he told her. "He just said, 'Veronica, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving.'" She went ballistic, of course. Screaming, crying, throwing things. But he just stood there, calm. He just kept saying, "I'm sorry, Veronica, but this is over." I pictured Veronica's face, contorted in a mask of shock and fury, the carefully constructed edifice of her control crumbling around her. Her ultimate weapon, the self-harm threat, had failed. Her laziness, her entitlement, her parasitic nature had finally consumed the host. There was no one else to blame, nowhere else to turn. Alex was now at Sarah's place, physically exhausted but mentally lighter. He was sleeping, Sarah reported, the deepest sleep he'd had in months. The quiet catalyst had succeeded. I hadn't directly manipulated Veronica, nor had I exacted any direct revenge. My role was far more subtle, far more potent. I had supported the victim's escape, knowing that without her primary food source, the parasite would simply wither and die. This was the vicarious justice I had anticipated, the true reckoning. The next few days were a whirlwind of updates from Sarah. Veronica's desperate calls to Alex went unanswered. She tried to guilt-trip him, to rage, to plead, all met with silence. Her mother, true to her word, refused to take her in once she confirmed Veronica had flunked out of college. There was nowhere for her to go. She was truly alone. Then came the phone call from Alex. My phone rang, displaying his name, and for a moment I hesitated. My jadedness warred with the knowledge of his suffering, but my steadfast nature won out. I answered. His voice, though still tinged with weariness, held a lightness I hadn't heard in ages. "Jolene," he began, his voice thick with emotion, I am so sorry for everything. For not listening, for choosing her over you. You were right about all of it." His apology was heartfelt, raw, honest. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to minimize his mistakes. he laid it all bare. And in that moment, listening to him, my own past hurts began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of compassion. The anger I had held onto for so long, the sting of his betrayal, softened. It wasn't forgiveness in the sense of erasing the past, but rather accepting it and moving forward. My motivation for justice, for seeing the scales balance, was fulfilled not just by Veronica's downfall, but by Alex's awakening. "It's okay, Alex," I said softly, meaning it. "You learned. That's what matters." We talked for a long time, catching up, rebuilding a bridge that had seemed irrevocably burned. He told me he was going to take some time to himself, get his finances in order, and try to find a place of his own. He looked forward to a future free from the constant draining presence of Veronica. And Veronica, her story, as I heard it, unfolded with tragic predictability. Without Alex's income, she couldn't afford the apartment. The landlord, a no-nonsense man who had already grown tired of her late rent payments, swiftly initiated eviction proceedings. She had nowhere to go. She tried calling other friends, those she had sporadically kept in touch with, but her reputation for being lazy and self-centered had preceded her. No one offered a couch, let alone a spare room. The carefully constructed network of people she exploited simply dissolved. Then there was Chloe, the deriding girl. I'd always suspected Veronica treated Chloe with the same casual contempt she showed everyone else, just hidden behind a veneer of shared gossip. It turned out my perception was correct. Alex recounted a story he'd pieced together from Sarah. Veronica, in her utter desperation, had called Chloe, expecting unwavering loyalty. "Chloe, I need somewhere to stay," she'd shrieked, fully expecting to be taken in. But Chloe, it seemed, had her own breaking point. Veronica, it turned out, had not only used Chloe for rides and small loans, but had also consistently undermined Chloe's relationships and spread malicious rumors about her behind her back, all while presenting herself as Chloe's closest confidant. Chloe, fed up and finally seeing Veronica for what she truly was, had simply hung up on her. The final twist. The deriding girl, once a devoted minion, had finally broken free, leaving Veronica truly and utterly alone. The final image I had of Veronica, relayed by Sarah, who had driven past the apartment building, was her sitting on the curb outside, amidst a small pile of belongings, a single battered suitcase next to her. Her perfect situation, built on the backs of others, had crumbled to dust. She was homeless, friendless, and completely without help. It was like watching the fall of Rome, as the Reddit post had so perfectly described. A vast, arrogant empire, collapsing under the weight of its own internal rot. The rain had returned, a gentle, cleansing drizzle as I stood by my window, looking out at the city of Salem. Alex was starting fresh, slowly rebuilding his life. Sarah was a true friend, a beacon of loyalty. And I, Jeline Croft, felt a profound, quiet sense of peace. The justice was served, not through my active intervention, but through the natural, undeniable consequences of a person's own choices. My jadedness hadn't faded, but it was softened by the knowledge that truth, eventually, always finds its way to the surface. And the steadfast part of me, the part that had endured and learned, knew that some wounds heal, leaving behind not scars but wisdom. And as I closed my eyes, a deep breath filling my lungs, I knew that some stories, though painful in the telling, offered a profound, hard-won truth, a truth I was finally ready to share. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.